The BloodStream Podcast, episode 40, is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Learn more about Takeda's commitment to the bleeding disorders community and the resources they have to offer at bleedingdisorders.com. On behalf of everyone at BloodStream, thanks Takeda.
Hello, and welcome to the BloodStream Podcast, episode 40, September 16th, 2019. I am Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
On this episode, NHF's 71st Bleeding Disorders Conference is just weeks away. We'll preview Believe Limited's presence at the country's largest community gathering. Back to school season can stress a caregiver out. But did you know that moms and dads experience stress differently? You probably did, but a new article from Prevention Magazine has some fresh intel on just how and why there's something of a gender divide when it comes to processing stress in our like segment. Tai Chi expert Rick Starks shares his An Ancient Remedy for Modern Times piece in our Community Share segment. Blogger Delisa O'Brien and singer-songwriter Kashy Keegan join me to talk sickle cell and Charcot-Marie Tooth Disease, respectively, during what is a global awareness month for both conditions. That's happening in today's comments segment. And Dr. Katherine High, the co-founder, president, and head of research and development for Spark Therapeutics, joins me to discuss what first sparked her interest in science and to preview the Science Fair launching at BDC in just a few weeks. Plus a moment for mental health with Debbie, streaming recs from Mama Sue, and parting shots from Nat and I, all that and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to Bloodstream. This is the banter part, Natalie.
I'm always a little slow to start bantering with you.
I mean, I just did a long, quick, and I just look at you and you're just staring right back at me.
I know.
Just staring right back at me.
Blank-faced.
That's nothing a partner in a moment of live performance likes more than to do a 2-minute monologue, turn to their scene partner and see nothing but a blank canvas. How are you, Nat?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Are you excited to be doing the podcast?
I am. I was daydreaming.
About what?
Too embarrassing to say.
By the way, you were daydreaming. You just said that so casually, as though that's an acceptable response.
I can't help. Sometimes I'm just in left field picking dandelions.
Well, when we hit the button, that should be a time to stop that. All right. Well, we're just going to have to keep moving right along here. Go right into the housekeeping section. We've got a few things I want to announce. The inhibitor series, you've heard us talk about it here before. It has now fully launched over on bloodlinepod.com. That's the Factor VIII inhibitors. Factor VIII Inhibitors, the next chapter, Bloodstream Media's newest 3-part podcast series, taking a look at the current and future state of living with hemophilia A with Factor VIII inhibitors. Episodes came out on August 26th, September 2nd, and September 9th. Huge special thanks to guests Justin Levesque, Dr. Guy Young, Sue Garrity, Liz Purvis, Eric Lowe, Janet Brewer, Benjamin Denman, Dr. Stephen Pipe, Dr. Galia Levy, and all of the show's contributors. You can listen to all of the episodes by looking up the Bloodline Podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts, or go to bloodlinepod.com for more. Mexico. Hey, did you know that in Mexico, if you are diagnosed with hemophilia after age 11, that you don't get access to Factor?
I did.
And how did you know that?
From Stop the Bleeding.
She says with the confidence of, that's just one of the...
Episode 2 of Stop the Bleeding taught me that this year.
Very good.
I didn't know that.
Okay, that's fair. Good. I'm glad, because that is what is in episode 2 of Stop the Bleeding. Just one of the difficult realities that Spencer, Nurse Jamie, and Dr. Young discover as season 9 of the multi-award winning web series Stop the Bleeding continues. Episode 6 is a real campy episode featuring a special community guest, and that goes live tomorrow, Tuesday, September 17th. And by the time that you next hear from Natalie and I, if she isn't off picking dandelions or whatever, Stop the Bleeding season 9 will be fully released in English anyway, with episode 10 going live on Tuesday, October 15th, when it's time for Spencer, Jamie, and Dr. Young to finally say goodbye to Villahermosa, Tabasco, Mexico, and head on back home to Fresno, California. Right? Catch up on all the laughs and maybe a few tears at stbhemo.com, or search Stop the Bleeding web series on YouTube. Season 9 to be released in Spanish later this fall. Episode 41 of the Bloodstream Podcast right here is going to be released per usual on the third Monday of the month, Monday, October 21st. Between now and then, as we've said, the NHF BDC will have come and gone, as it's taking place Thursday, October 3rd through Sunday, October 6th in Anaheim, California, which means not only will 3 full days of educational sessions, networking opportunities, and access to quite the exhibition and education hall at the largest gathering of the U.S. bleeding disorders community each year have come and gone as well, But Amy, Josh, Avra, Rob, Colby, Ryan, Natalie, Martin, Stoney, Evan, Jessica, Tony, Katie, Josh, D, Mike, E, and everyone working at and for Believe Limited to make sure that the 5th Annual Teen Impact Awards, the launch of the Science Fair, and the Moth Story Hour are a success. Well, all of them are going to take a nice deep breath, or several hundred, as those national event community programs Believe Limited launches will have come and gone. 2, if you're heading to the BDC, I cannot recommend strongly enough, biased though I may be, checking out the 5th Annual Teen Impact Awards on Thursday night, the Science Fair, located inside the exhibition hall, Friday day, and the Moth Story Hour, Friday night, all produced by Believe Limited with the incredible support of our founding sponsors, Takeda, Spark Therapeutics, and BioMarin, respectively. Learn more about the conference and what Believe Limited has going on by going to believeltd.com/BDC 2019. That's believeltd.com/BDC 2019. Now, as I said, episode 41 of BloodStream will be released on schedule, and you can expect updates and stories from the conference to be a part of it, as can you expect a preview of the Rare Disease Film Festival, where Bombardier Blood will be helped kicking off the country's premier film festival dedicated entirely to films depicting rare disease. That'll all be coming up on the October episode. But I also have to tell you that our company insists on a mandatory week off after the conference, and I'm not entirely sure how BloodStream's going to capture the conference or what exactly that post-production and distro flow is going to look like. But I can tell you that if you subscribe to the BloodStream Podcast and the Ask the Expert podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever, you'll get episode 41 of BloodStream and episode 31 of Ask the Expert delivered to you right on time. And if there's a topic that you want to hear about, a guest you'd like to hear from, or if you're interested in contributing to BloodStream in some way, let us know. Facebook.com/BloodStream Media, at BloodStream Info on Twitter and Instagram, or email us, mailbag@BloodStreamMedia.com. Now for the episode 40 Like segment. This month's Like segment explores the effects of stress on the brain, the differences of these effects in both men and women, and some fresh tips on managing your stress effectively. But before we jump in, I want to thank this month's sponsor of the Like segment, Genentech. You just heard me mention that the NHF Bleeding Disorders Conference, or BDC, is coming up starting on October 3rd, and we here at BloodStream Media, we can't wait to tell you about all the breakthroughs, news, and activities from the conference. I'm using a funny voice, but you know that's true. We're especially looking forward to hearing what Genentech has to say at Booth 10 about a different type of treatment for Hemophilia A. You may have heard of it. They'll also be hosting a breakfast symposium. Wow, that'd be amazing!
With ponies?
Oh, Genentech, is that something that's happening? Okay, no.
It sounds expensive.
Plus, legal and regulatory would have a fit. So we're going to have to settle for the breakfast symposium Friday morning, October 4th.
But next year, maybe we could...
Yeah, so Genentech, if you're listening, maybe next year, Symposium. You know, it's a new idea. We'd be very happy to support it. We would definitely cover it on BloodStream. We would
like
cover
the mini
Symposium.
pony from Parks and Rec.
Perhaps, yeah, that we could use it as a starting place anyway. But their symposium will be Friday morning, October 4th at 7 a.m. with members of the Hemophilia A community sharing their experiences with a different type of treatment for Hemophilia A. The Bleeding Disorders Conference starts again October 3rd in Anaheim, California, and you can find Genentech at Booth 10 and ask them about the ponies. We'll be there, Genentech will be there, and we hope to see you there too. All right, Natalie, and what do you got for us in this month's Like segment?
I have an article that came out from the magazine Prevention and entitled How Stress Hits Women's Brains Harder and Why Men Don't Always Get It. So basically, you can be a healthy individual, but without proper stress management, you're doing a lot of damage to your body, and most notably your brain. Recent research has just linked high levels of the stress hormone cortisol, which we've talked about on this podcast before, to brain shrinkage and impaired memory in otherwise healthy middle-aged adults. And these effects are more pronounced in women. So the article goes into how stress affects your brain. Although brains have evolved over time, the article says the speed of life today is the main stressor. It's much faster than our brain's ability to adapt. So we have too little time with too few resources to address what life throws at us in a given day.
So that sounds like anecdotally, I'm like, yeah, man, life's crazy fast. But scientifically, do they like give you a data point for that?
I mean, they basically just say like our brains are evolving, but the speed at which things go today and with technology, like they can't and won't evolve as fast as things are moving. So Dr. Amit Saad, he's a professor of medicine at the Mayo Clinic. He wrote a book called Mindfulness Redesigned for the 21st Century, where he kind of deep dives all of this. And the article uses him and his book to kind of go through. So it addresses a number of traps that frequently ensnare our brains. One is focus problems. We used to have to focus outward more when there were large predators. Mm-hmm. So when we're focusing outward, our ability to focus was really, really strong because we had to be. And now 80% of our focus is inward, and it creates looped thinking. And
why is that? Like, why is it inward?
Because we don't have as many outward threats as humans. Like, actual threats. So we have the ability for our brains to wander. Like we have this sort of, it's a privilege and a freedom because we don't have to, like saber-toothed lions or tigers rather. We don't have that. So there's a lot of, standing in left field picking dandelions going on. And because of that, we loop stress scenarios a lot. So focus problems. The second trap is fear. So fear is a survival mechanism, and it's needed to detect both physical and emotional threats. But because of that, our brain stores those threats to protect us from future events.
Right.
But then that creates a negativity bias in our brain.
Negativity bias. I've never heard that term. I like that.
Yes, exactly. So focus problems, number 1, fear, number 2, and number 3 is fatigue. And many of our organs in our bodies can continue. Our kidneys work consistently, our heart works consistently, our lungs work consistently. Our brain needs a break. Brain fatigue leads to stress, and stress leads to brain fatigue, and it's a continuous closed loop. So those are the 3 biggest traps.
Now, how are those different for men and women, though?
It affects women more because the limbic area of women's brains are more active. And in the limbic area, that's the part of the brain that controls emotions and memories.
Okay.
Making women remember hurt and slights more than men.
Uh-huh.
And because of that, it strengthens those circuits.
Makes sense.
So the more you tread down a path in your brain, the easier it is to go there.
Sure, it's like building
neuroplasticity.
Muscles. Right.
And then also parenting and emotional well-being of the household is still, even though there is a leaning of gender equality, it's still a lion's share on women. And so not only are most women having those loops of their own lives and experiences, but they're managing it for their entire household. And if you're a mother and you're a mother of someone with a chronic condition, any perceived threat is going to loop in your brain and up your cortisol levels and up your stress levels, which then can lead to your own chronic diseases.
And one thing that you and I were touching upon very briefly before we started recording was that while these things we're acknowledging that there's a quote, gender divide or a difference between men and women in these things, it's not... that's not necessarily universally the case. They're more kind of masculine and feminine more than male and female specific. Would that be accurate? The more male-female traits? Genders
process threats differently, according to research at Yale. And so it's interesting because they use the word genders and not sex. So I don't know if that necessarily is
more
how
inclusive?
or how you identify, like, or how your brain... I don't know. There is biological. They don't go into the biological, but they did do an fMRI on men's brains and women's brains.
What's an fMRI?
Yeah, basically it's imaging of the brain that shows up what parts light up during certain scenarios. And under anxiety and stress, different areas based on your gender light up differently. And so then the article actually goes into ways in which you can negotiate these differences in partnerships. So, if you feel like you're having a stressor that your partner doesn't recognize, there are 3 suggestions. You can ask your partner just to listen, like that you don't want actioning or feedback. You just need to be heard. And then to treat yourself with compassion and to not get self-critical of feeling big emotions. Because that doesn't help the stress level.
Wouldn't imagine it would.
And then explain to your partner when you feel your experience is being dismissed or downplayed, so that when you share, just because it's not the way they might perceive that stressor, that that not to minimize it, like that also doesn't help the situation.
Sure.
So it kind of goes a little deep dive into how to negotiate these differences within a partnership. And then both for men and women, it goes through some how you can control your stress and calm your brain exercises, which I thought were different and ones I hadn't heard.
Like what?
So it said, give your brain some rum.
What?
And that's not the Caribbean liquor, but rather rest, uplifting emotions, and motivation.
They really did. They stretched a little bit with you there, but okay.
And, so they say that, when you're feeling stressed, first rest, and then, even watching like a cute animal video, just taking a few seconds to kind of do something uplifting or motivating. And they go through, they have under each section a how-to, kind of deep diving, reading inspiring quotes, reaching out to a friend. Their second suggestion is a morning gratitude practice. When you wake up, just think about the people you're grateful for and, send them a little well wish.
That's very sweet.
And then the third one's being mindfully present. So it's not necessarily having a meditation practice if that's not something you feel like you consistently can practice. Mm-hmm. But they say you can challenge yourself to be curious and notice the details. So it's being mindful outwardly. The color of the barista's eyes at the coffee shop, the pattern of your boss's necktie, flowers that are blooming in your neighborhood. And when you do that, it actually lowers your stress levels.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So that obviously replaces the need to go outward because the saber-tooth whatever is coming, and it's putting you outward because you're paying attention to details, being more mindful. It's also a way to change your perception or biases. If you find that you have a certain kind of bias, this was a part of Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. If you have a certain kind of bias, by exposing yourself to situations that challenge that bias over and over and over again, you can essentially train your instincts. You can train that blink of the eye gut reaction to something that feels uncontrollable because you've exposed yourself in a way that's changing those neural pathways over time by challenging the bias or the prejudice that existed there originally. So I just appreciate being able to hear almost like applied science, right? The ways in which this comes into our lives in different areas.
Well, and it's a form of cognitive behavioral therapy too. So it's neuroplasticity and things that feel out of control. It's because you go down the path that is so well treaded, and then it does take some time to make a different turn. And then the last tip they had was focus on kindness. They said even the nicest among us are quick to judge others, especially if they're different from us. And, that's another survival thing. Our brain does want to notice differences to tell us, is that a threat or not? But to calm the amygdala of your brain down when you're feeling judgy, just also know that like everyone else struggles and take a moment to kind of change that judginess to compassion and kindness. So I just thought they were like some of the similar stuff, but some actually actionable ways to manage your stress and easy ways, like ones anyone can do at any time. So the article I thought was really good and interesting, and
So again, it comes from Prevention Magazine. You can find the link to it in the program notes. And that will do it for this month's Like segment, brought to us by Genentech. Thank you again, Genentech, for sponsoring this. And a reminder, you'll find them at Booth 10 at the BDC October 3rd to October 6th. Thank you, Natalie, very much for today's Like segment.
My pleasure.
Now kicking it over to this month's A Moment for Mental Health segment with Debbie De La Riva and Amy Board.
Welcome to A Moment for Mental Health, our monthly conversation that breaks down stigma and provides a safe space about things that matter. Our goal in this segment is to break mental, emotional, and behavioral health down into its various pieces, and in each episode focus on just one or two of those pieces. As always, today I'm joined by BloodStream contributor Debbie De La Riva, who is a licensed professional counselor with Mental Health Matters 2, and she is based out of Houston, Texas. Thank you again, as always, for joining us, Debbie.
It is my pleasure.
So I was thinking about this podcast and screenings, mental health screenings, depression, anxiety screenings. I was thinking about all the screenings we get for physical health that are now a part of our routine doctor's visits, like blood pressure and mammograms and blood work. But this idea of a mental health screening is probably pretty foreign to most people.
I know. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, really, an average person on the street, they would probably know what these screenings are, and even probably have a good idea of when you should be getting them done. You and I could probably Google right now health screenings, and we could come up with some nationally recognized screening recommendations. It's pretty amazing to me that we don't have this yet for mental health, but we're working on it.
So are there types of mental health screenings? If you are suspect that you maybe have depression, should you get a depression screening? So what types of screenings are there?
Definitely. I mean, there's screenings for most of the mental health conditions, anything from depression, anxiety, the more rare ones of eating disorders or OCD. And of course, there are validated also screenings on alcohol and substance abuse.
How do you go about it? How do you go about getting a mental health screen?
Well, the good news for this community is that you can get a screening for a mental health condition at the same place where you get care for your hemophilia von Willebrand, and that's at your hemophilia treatment center. And the reason you can do this is because HTCs were developed on a comprehensive model, meaning that that person's physical and mental health has been recognized for a long time. It's just as important in somebody's overall quality of life. And they've known for a long time that the bleeding disorder just does not affect our body. It can affect things like our self-image or the amount of stress we're on a daily basis. So what's really important to know, and I've also heard this from social workers, when you come to the HTC, just don't talk about your physical symptoms. Ask to talk to a social worker about how you're feeling. Really, how you're really feeling.
Why are screenings so important? It seems like they are popping up more in the public health conversation. And what is the purpose of a screening, and why are they important?
Yeah, the screenings are important because they're really the tenets of public health, and that is prevention and early intervention. Because if you think about something like depression, if we can catch that in the very beginning, before relationships are ruined, or before somebody gets too far behind in school, or later can't perform at work, if we can catch the problem and do interventions to correct the way somebody thinks or feels or even behaves, then we can prevent a lot of damage that is really difficult to deal with once done.
So what can we do in our community, in our bleeding disorder community, to encourage folks getting screened for mental health and just mental health screenings in general?
Yeah, the first thing we can do is, as a community, is to give out these messages that mental health screenings are important and they're available. And so, help people understand that they can get this done at their general practitioner visit. Many medical doctors have screenings. They can also... a lot of people don't realize that they can go online and have a confidential mental health screening in the comfort of their home. If they go to Mental Health America, they actually have these screening programs, and we'll post that information on the list that goes with these podcasts. So you don't have to go to see a psychiatrist or a therapist. You can get these screenings all kinds of different places. And I think that the thing that we can do, there's many things we can do on a chapter and an HC level to make sure that this information is going out. We can have mental health screenings on site at all of the chapter events. We can also have mental health posters in the treatment center rooms where we're waiting to see the doctor. It gives that message that we recognize this as important, and we're here. We can help you do something about this. I'm proud to say that my treatment center, the Gold State Hemophilia Treatment Center, just had a wellness fair a couple of months ago, and it's exactly what we did. We had screenings on site. We had a speaker talk. We had a community member talk about his struggles with mental illness, and then we had resources right there where people could walk up to. I also want to talk about the power of social media. If we could all kind of get united and put information about mental health awareness and screenings through our chapters, our HTCs, our national website, that would be amazing. In fact, wouldn't it be something, Amy, that October 10th is the National Depression Screening Day? Wouldn't that be amazing in 2020 if we were all pumping out these messages and encouraging people to do at least an online confidential screen? Yeah, and the last thing I just wanted to say is that we're making a lot of progress. NHF has a My Bleeding Disorder Community Survey. Well, they're taking in this information about psychosocial factors and how it's affecting us. So there's a lot that's being done and a lot to be done.
Absolutely. What fantastic ideas. I love that this is something that the entire community can rally behind. Chapter leaders and program staff. I hope you hear this message. That is a wonderful resource for our community at your events. And as always, Debbie, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to have a conversation next month.
I'm so happy to be part of your podcast. You're always on the leading edge of topics that mean a great deal to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk next month.
Time once again to thank the presenting sponsor of the BloodStream Podcast, Takeda. You want to learn more about von Willebrand disease in women or about student financial aid and bleeding disorders? Do you need help finding a hemophilia treatment center? Visit bleedingdisorders.com and check out the resources that Takeda's made available for the bleeding disorders community. That's bleedingdisorders.com. And for support of the BloodStream Podcast, of course, we say thanks, Takeda. Now, this month's Community Share segment comes to us from Rick Starks. Rick is 65 years old, has severe hemophilia B, and is a certified instructor and practitioner of Tai Chi. In fact, community members attending events where Rick is present may know him as that peaceful-looking white-haired dude leading people in breathing exercises before breakfast. At least that's how I identified him for quite a long time. He's previously written a piece titled How Tai Chi Saved Me, and here on BloodStream, Rick shares an ancient remedy for modern times, and that is next. But before we get to that, I have to let you know that this month's Share segment is brought to you by a new initiative from Sanofi Genzyme, June for Joint Health. Hey, did you know that nearly 80% of bleeds occur in your joints? And most of those bleeds go undetected, which may play a role in joint damage. Clinical studies have shown that conditioning, stretching, exercising, and the right treatment can improve joint health, reduce joint bleeds, and help resolve target joints. Balancing activity and joint health is a common struggle amongst patients with bleeding disorders. So, the National Hemophilia Foundation and Sanofi Genzyme have teamed up to encourage the community to develop lifelong habits that promote safe joint building and physical activities, not just in June, but all year long. With June for Joint Health, I gotta say, it might need a little bit of an update for the fall. June for Joint Health. There's 12 months in the year. June's being asked to do a lot of work, carrying a whole year with the name June in the title. But this initiative is for everyone. All activities and age levels, the whole family can start active habits that lead to healthy joints. Are you interested in learning how to get active, healthy joints for you and your family? Well, follow NHF on Facebook to get moving and visit juneforjointhealth.org for joint health tips and events near you. And now on to the Share segment and Rick Starks.
As a 65-year-old severe hemophiliac, I've run the course on many forms of treatments. As a child, I remember sucking on salt pork for mouth bleeds and eating raw Spanish peanuts that were thought to boost factor levels. When fresh frozen plasma came along, I thought it was the greatest treatment on earth. But it all took a toll. My joints in particular took the worst of it, especially my ankles. In my late 20s, I remember the first signs of arthritis in my ankles and hips. The range of motion was already becoming limited and painful. I had been involved in the martial arts since I was 18, and although it did damage to my body, I also credit it for strengthening and increasing flexibility in me. Let's not even discuss what it did for my confidence and feelings of self-worth. It was the first time I ever physically pushed myself beyond my perceived limits. To make a long story short, in my late 30s, I had bilateral hip replacements. When it was discovered, I had no remaining cartilage in my hips. They were bone on bone. My ankles were badly damaged too, but I continued on as replacements were not available yet. The pain increased until even walking was intolerable. I couldn't make it further than 2 blocks. I tried many things, braces, medications, physical therapy, but nothing seemed to resolve my pain. Life has a way of bringing us full circle. I went back to my roots in the martial arts. This time, something much more gentle, Tai Chi. Because of the slow, gentle movements, I was able to perform at a basic level. I watched videotapes, learning the basics, but felt something was lacking. Then fate stepped in. I came across a weekend seminar in Denver, led by a well-known instructor, David Dorian Ross. I decided to attend, hoping that I could participate for a little while and could further my practice. For the first time, I swallowed my pride and explained hemophilia to an instructor. You see, I had always hidden it from my previous instructors. He was completely understanding and told me to rest as I needed. We began training, and the next thing I knew, we had broke for lunch. I trained for 4 hours without pain. Why does Tai Chi work well? There are many reasons. The first being the movement is very slow and gentle. You only do what your body allows you to do. We are all different. We all have limitations due to past injuries that cause an imbalance in us. Tai Chi restores your body to its natural balance. Of course, I would have some pain when I pushed past my limitations. I was taught to go to that first initial moment of pain, hold it there for a second, then release it. My range of motion and strength increased while my limitations decreased. Second, because you focus on the movement, Tai Chi becomes very meditative. You don't think about what you can or cannot do, or even the twinge of pain that you sometimes feel. You tend to forget about everything but your breath and movement. You become mindful and focused. I discovered that the limitations I put on myself were more mental than physical. I am capable of more than I thought. Within the last year, I've had both ankles replaced. My recoveries were short, much shorter than anticipated. I believe this was due to my daily practice of Tai Chi. Is this for everyone? Probably not. Is it worth a try? Absolutely.
Thank you again, Rick, for contributing that piece. And you can read Rick's blog at the BloodStream Pod blog page, bloodstreampod.com/blog. And thank you again to our September Share segment sponsor, Sanofi. That's 5 S's in a row. September Share segment sponsor, Sanofi. SSSSS, Sanofi Genzyme. So that would be the end of the streak. But visit juneforjointhealth.org and get moving. And thanks, Sanofi Genzyme. End of ad. It's now time for the BloodStream Podcast, episode 40, comment segment setup section. This is where I tell you what it's all about. So we've got 2 guests that are coming on for the comment segment this month to talk about 2 different disease awareness months. Delisa O'Brien is a nutrition consultant student living with sickle cell disease. She's also a great dear friend of Natalie's and mine. And Kashy Keegan is a British singer-songwriter living in Hong Kong. He has an interesting story. In 2013, his song This Is My Dream was adopted by Hong Kong protesters. Kashy was then flown to Hong Kong to perform the song live before 30,000 protesters and sympathizers, which catapulted the song to #1 on iTunes in Hong Kong, past Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, and Justin Bieber. Kashy also has an inherited neuromuscular condition called Charcot-Marie Tooth. I'm still getting used to saying that. Charcot-Marie Tooth, Mary Tooth. Well, he's gonna clarify this momentarily, but it causes progressive muscle wastage in his feet, ankles, lower legs, and sometimes in the hands as well. September is Global Awareness Month for both sickle cell and CMT. So for the comments segment, I've asked Delisa and Kashy to join for separate conversations about what these recognitions mean for them in their respective communities, and from their points of view, what they hope come out of awareness months such as these. And we'll start with my conversation with dear friend Delisa O'Brien. Okay, now for the episode 40 comment segment, a special segment this month, taking a look at 2 different condition awareness months. We start with sickle cell disease. It is September National, or I think actually International Sickle Cell Disease Month. And joining me now is friend and a repeat customer here to the BloodStream Podcast. We're not introducing her. We're reminding you of her because she's been here before. Her name is Delisa O'Brien. She's a nutrition consultant student, as well as somebody who's living with sickle cell and a longtime friend of Natalie and I. Hey, Delisa, how are you?
Hey, Patrick. Hi, Natalie. I'm doing really good.
Welcome back to the podcast. It's been a minute since we've had you, so I dare not even attempt to ask you to give us updates, so to speak. But in a word or two, how is your fall starting off?
It's starting off pretty good. I'm busy. So, as you mentioned, right now I'm a student studying nutrition consulting, and I have about 2.5 months left in the program. So that's where final projects and stuff are due. So I'm feeling it. I'm feeling that weight.
But I can also hear in your voice the acknowledgement or excitement that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's that senior thing of there's both, and senior, I'm thinking back to high school when there's a lot to do and yet there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So it somehow feels manageable.
Exactly. I'm trying to plan my I found the light celebration, but I'm there. I'm I can do it. And then I can rest. Yes,
and take that well-earned trip or rest of whatever it turns out to be. We wanted to talk about Sickle Cell Awareness Month. Obviously, Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month being March, that's a time where people with hemophilia and von Willebrand disease are particularly attuned to awareness months. And I think they also mean something differently to each group, depending on what the needs of that group are, depending at any given point in time. So just to start, what does Sickle Cell Awareness Month really kind of mean to you? And could you give us a handful of kind of 101 facts for those who might not be at all acquainted with sickle cell disease?
Yeah. So Sickle Cell Awareness Month for me is just kind of a reminder to my friends and family where I put the banner on my profile picture and everything and just kind of post random facts just so people can know, hey, this is something that I'm still dealing with on a daily basis. And it's important that, people are more in tune with what's going on in that community rather than being oh yeah, I have a friend that has this thing. I've heard of it before. It just needs to be more at the forefront of some people's brain, I believe. But in terms of statistics, there are about 100,000 Americans who have sickle cell disease and about 3 million Americans who carry the trait. In the United States, most people who have sickle cell disease are of African American ancestry or they identify themselves as Black. And some studies estimate that there are about 10% of patients with sickle cell disease who are of Hispanic descent. As well as there are also many people with sickle cell disease who come from Southern European, Middle Eastern, or Asian Indian backgrounds. So it's not primarily Black, but it is something that affects mostly people from different parts of the world. About 1 in 13 Black or African American babies are born with sickle cell trait, and about 1 in every 305 Black or African American babies are born with sickle cell disease. And sickle cell disease occurs in about 1 out of every 16,000 Hispanic American births. So you can see the disparity there in terms of African American versus other cultures. People who have sickle cell disease have abnormal hemoglobin. This is the hemoglobin S in their red blood cells. Hemoglobin is a protein that helps your red blood cells carry oxygen throughout your body. And people with sickle cell disease inherit 2 abnormal hemoglobin genes, 1 from each parent. There are actually 6 different types of sickle cell. So hemoglobin SS is the most common and often the most severe type of sickle cell disease. That's the one that I have. Hemoglobin SC and hemoglobin S beta thalassemia are 2 other common types of sickle cell disease. But, and I actually learned this recently, hemoglobin SD and SE are less common types of the sickle cell as well.
Wow, thank you. That was a great overview. That was really helpful. And those numbers really do kind of, as you said, draw some pretty clear. You can draw some pretty clear conclusions from those numbers, which I think is important when identifying who truly has a condition, and then how do you have to adjust the way you think about it to account for those realities. You talked a little bit about the importance of Awareness Month in helping friends, families, and a greater network understand what it is that you're going through. From a medical, clinical research perspective, does an Awareness Month have any role to play there? And if so, what do you see that as?
Absolutely. I think that awareness in terms of the medical community is very important, just so when we are going to emergency rooms or going to see just a primary care doctor, a lot of the times it's just something that they had a chapter mention it in their studies, but they've never really experienced working with someone with sickle cell. So it just needs to be more of a forefront discussion in terms of okay, this is what this person is going through. It might not be apparent on the outside, but I should take a different set of measures when treating them. And when it comes to research, of course, everybody wants the cure, so if there can't be a cure, if people aren't taking the time to say, all right, I'm going to focus my research on sickle cell and what we can do to make their life a little better.
And then I noticed you had mentioned as well that we can be doing things to reduce the rate of children born with sickle cell disease. Can you speak a little more to that?
Yes. So sickle cell, as I mentioned a little bit, it's an inherited disease. So your parents have to both have the trait, and then there's the statistics where 1 in 4 children of those two people will have the SS disease. So it's important that people get tested to know whether or not they are a carrier of the trait. Because as I mentioned, there are 3 million people who carry the trait, and it's not, uncanny that 2 of those 3 million get together and have a baby. So if they're aware of their sickle cell trait, then they can make a more informed decision about how to proceed in terms of having children. And
what would you say is the most common misconception when it comes to sickle cell?
So sickle cell isn't often thought of as an invisible disability, but I would consider it to be classified as such. And that people aren't always, walking around talking about it, or it isn't apparent by looking at someone. I believe you would agree with this, and I think you did a campaign at one point where there are certain things that, hey, we just move through the world. We aren't always advocating every second of every day, but it's important to know that, hey, when I'm at home or something like that, I'm dealing with serious, intense pain. And it's not just a matter of oh, you look good, or you always have such a positive attitude about it. It's still something I carry with me and have to adjust as I go about daily. Is it cold today? All right, I'm wearing extra layers. Is it hot? I'm drinking extra water. And it's just something that I think it's important to realize that not everybody, wears their illness on their sleeve, if you will.
Do you have any examples of a time where maybe that invisible disability piece came into light in a dynamic between you and somebody else?
Yeah, actually, recently, I think it was Labor Day. Yeah, Labor Day weekend. I went to the supermarket with my boyfriend, and we've been dating for about 4 months now. So he's actually been pretty proactive about reading information about it and just kind of learning what it'll mean in terms of us being together for the future. So we were in the supermarket to get a few things for barbecue later that day, and my leg starts hurting. And I kept quiet about it, but I was limping a little bit. And he finally kind of noticed that I was walking funny. So I just mentioned, yeah, my leg's hurting. Can you please walk a little slower? He immediately kind of went into, okay, we're done here, let's go home. And I calmly had to be no, we haven't finished getting everything, let's keep going. So he responds, it doesn't matter, we'll get stuff later, let's go home. Which I did get a little snappy, and just had to remind him, this isn't how this is going to work. If I tell you I'm in pain, we're not going to drop everything and just go home every time. Sometimes I just need something like you walking slower, or maybe we need to step outside if a room is too cold. It's just not a matter of drop everything and go. I just want him to understand that I know how to deal with it, work with me kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a good example of him, I'm sure, acting out of the best of intention and trying to help, but because it is an invisible disability, there's a certain amount of you have to both, I mean, I'm speaking, it's kind of funny sitting here with Natalie, I'm speaking, projecting the position of the partner or the caregiver and not that of the patient. But you both have to trust that your partner can communicate their needs. And also sometimes you do have to like use your discretion to try to help your partner maybe, address the thing they don't want to have to say. But so early in a relationship, to make it very clear that in order for me, and this is me reading into what you're saying a little bit, Delisa, but some of what I gather is in order for me to feel comfortable and safe to admit to you when I'm struggling or in pain, I need you to hear what I'm saying, and I need you to give me the agency that I know how to deal with it, and not to suddenly feel as though you now need to take charge. I just want to let you in so that we can adjust, not so that you can rescue me. That's kind of what it feels like to me. That was what that experience had in there.
Exactly that. It definitely was if I say, hey, we need to go to the emergency room, that's you go into rescue mode. If I'm just saying, hey, I just need you to walk slower, then it's just like, all you got to do is walk slower.
You're making it pretty simple when you break it down that way. It actually reminds me, we covered a piece earlier in the episode that Natalie led us through on stress and the way that men and women kind of treat it a little differently. And some of that feels a little appropriate in this conversation. I'm conscious of our time, Delisa, so I want to ask you a couple more questions. In your experience, is there stigma associated with sickle cell disease? And if so, can you define or describe that stigma?
Yeah, so kind of going back to the misconceptions, most of the stigma does have to deal with people being unable to empathize with what they can't see. So especially in the medical setting, it's like I can describe my pain using every word in the English language, but there's still a possibility that I won't be believed or that someone will think I'm faking and, or it might not be that bad if I can function, when the reality is that, we can function through the pain and we're not lazy, we're not liars. We've just been experiencing pain for so long that we kind of have learned to continue to function despite what's going on. And unfortunately, we are kind of living through the opioid crisis at the same time as us having severe pain. So there have been numerous stories that I've heard, and I've even experienced it once, where we go to the emergency room and they kind of treat us as if we're drug seekers rather than just there trying to alleviate the pain. So this kind of goes back to the need for awareness, where it's like, can someone with sickle cell also suffer from addiction? Yes, but in delaying treatment, that could mean life or death for some people because we don't know what's going on besides, the pain initially. So you can't just blanket, stigmatize someone as an addict just because they're asking for morphine straight out the gate, Reminds
me of something I read earlier today, actually, in one of the Facebook groups for people with hemophilia. It was from an older guy in the community who was very upset and he actually used the word betrayed, that he felt betrayed by the medical community with all this hamping down on pain medication because, as he put it, as a hemophiliac later in his life who's had a lot of joint deformity, who's lived through Hep C, who's lived through HIV, he relies on these pain medications. And there were a number of people who jumped in kind of saying similar, supporting that and citing similar feelings and experiences. And, I'm sympathetic to that because if this wasn't a complex problem, we would have solved it by now. It's a problem for many reasons, and this is one of them, because there are people who need medications, and if we simply just disallow them to receive those, as you said, Delisa, it could ultimately mean life or death, and at the very least will mean a significant hampering of someone's life experience and quality of life. So it's a complicated issue that hopefully things like awareness months do help raise the collective intelligence of. One final question for you, Delisa. Is there it's kind of an exciting time, it seems, for people with sickle cell because we're seeing medical updates and advancements at a rate that we haven't seen before. So we're getting closer to some exciting treatment periods, it seems anyway, in sickle cell. Is there any scientific or treatment advancement or update that you are most excited about or interested in?
Yes, actually. Just for the sake of time, I'll speed through it a little bit. So we actually got a new drug approved by the FDA about 2 years ago. So it's called Indari, and it helps to reduce the acute complications of sickle cell so that people have less crises attacks. So this is the first drug that's been approved in about 20 years. So we've been waiting, and it'll be interesting to people. Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, the current drug hydroxyurea is great, but, you know, if someone for some reason couldn't handle the hydroxyurea, now they have a second option, and hopefully it's more tolerable. The next thing I'll mention is that there has been a lot of news about the gene editing tools and treatments that are out. I actually saw two really big stories this year. One was on 60 Minutes, and then one was in like NPR and like New York Times. But essentially, there are patients with sickle cell who are signing up for gene editing treatments that are essentially removing their bone marrow, modifying the gene mutation that's causing sickle cell, and returning essentially healthy bone marrow back to these patients so that they can, quote unquote, have a normal life. You know, people are very hesitant to say the cure word, but it really does seem like a cure is finally here, even though it is a bit risky. But, you know, every individual can judge for themselves whether they want to move forward with doing a trial for the gene editing procedure.
We are living in the future. And that is an area too where hemophilia and sickle cell are running in interesting parallel tracks when it comes to gene therapy developments. I could certainly talk with you about this, Delisa, at much greater length, and perhaps we will in the not too distant future. But at least for today, that is the time that we have. So I have to thank you for putting this together, and hopefully it's helped listeners appreciate just a little bit more about sickle cell and how common it actually is. As you were saying earlier, there are about 100,000 who have the disease, but about 3 million Americans who carry the trait. You know, that's not a small percentage of the population.
No, it is not.
So hopefully we've helped people learn just a little bit more about their fellow Americans. Thank you, Delisa, and I look forward to talking to you again in the near future. Really appreciate this.
You're very welcome. Have a good one.
All right. Now, unlike with Delisa, Kashy and I have never spoken before. Kashy Keegan is a singer and songwriter living in Hong Kong who has Charcot-Marie Tooth Disease and agreed to come on the pod to talk a bit about his experience with it and why at this point in his life and career he's chosen to start writing about it and talking about it. But this should be fun because we have never spoken to each other before. You're about to hear that now. So here it is. Here's Kashy Keegan. Kashy, good morning. I believe good morning, right? It's early where you are now, I think.
Yes, there's quite a time difference.
It was
It's early morning.
Took us a moment to figure out how best to schedule this so that it was not too early on one end, not too late on the other, and we did it. And in no small part thanks to your willingness. So thank you for your willingness. With September being Charcot-Marie Tooth Disease Awareness Month, an international awareness month, and I'm not familiar with CMT before being introduced to you. And I mentioned this to you through email, but for listeners' benefit, my producing partner, Ryan Gielen, just sent me a link to the piece that you published on Narratively at the end of August. And I was really, really moved because while the piece was, so Kashy is a singer-songwriter, and I'll have you in a moment take us through a little bit of how you came to a rise of prominence in Hong Kong. But this piece was talking about CMT's role in your life and its impact on you as a performer and as an artist. And what particularly resonated with me was how you expressed the fear of being found out at a certain stage, or that your performance career would in some way reveal this perceived weakness, perhaps. And that really resonated on a deep level. It inspired me to reach out to you. And here we are. So if you could, give us a little background on yourself, how you came to be where you are. Why are you in Hong Kong at 7 a.m.? You can lead us through that, and then we'll get to why at this stage you are writing as you are about CMT.
Yeah. No, it was an interesting story, kind of an unlikely story as well as to why I came to Hong Kong. But as you just said, I was a singer-songwriter. And for the best part of about 15 years in the UK, I was recording demos of my song in my free time, and then sending them out to different record labels and managers and trying to get a record deal. But it didn't really materialize. And so then I kind of gave up because I mostly because I wasn't really getting anywhere, but also because I have Charcot-Marie Tooth Disease, which is a inherited neurological condition, and it's progressive, so it gets worse over time. So those kind of things combined, I kind of gave up. But just as I gave up, everything kind of started to happen on the music side. And at random, one day I started a career in journalism, and I was working for a magazine in London. And then one day out of the blue, I just got an email from Universal Music, based in Hong Kong. And there was a new TV network starting in Hong Kong, and they wanted to use one of my songs that they'd found online. And they wanted to use it as a theme song for the new TV network. So I jumped at the chance, and I signed my first kind of record deal, which was just a single song publishing agreement. And then I didn't really hear anything for about 6 months, and they told me that the song was going to be used because the TV network was waiting for a broadcast license from the government. So 6 months went past, and then the news broke that the TV network didn't get the license. So before the dream kind of happened in terms of, my song being used in the TV network, it seemed as if it was over before it kind of started. Yeah, it was a bit disappointing because, I kind of got my hopes up. I was a bit excited.
And what was the controversy? Why was the application rejected? Why did it lead to protests? I mean, I don't want to get us derailed too far, but this is very unusual. And of course, Hong Kong protests are not something out of the news at this particular moment in time. So what was going on exactly?
Yeah, there were suspicions that, a couple of suspicions. And one was that the central government in mainland China, in Beijing, they were exerting more control on the media in Hong Kong, which is an autonomous region. So they have basic civil liberties enshrined in the law here that they don't have in mainland China. And one of them is free press, free media. But there was fear that they were kind of clamping down on the media here and taking more control of it. And then they didn't want to have a TV network that wasn't under their control and was operated by, an independent individual. Yeah, that was one of the suspicions. And the other one was that rival TV networks with political connections didn't want this new TV network because it was already becoming popular among local people. And I think they feared the potential loss in advertising revenue. Yeah, they used their political connections to ensure that the license wasn't granted.
As you said, having even given up the idea of making a career in music, and then all of a sudden it's starting up, and then it's not, and then there's a protest, and then you're flown into Hong Kong and sing before 30,000 people, and the song reaches #1 on the charts. Like, what a crazy year that must have been for you. And did you know kind of pretty quickly, I think my career is moving my life here. I'm going to be relocating to Hong Kong and figuring things out from here?
After the the first time that I visited to Hong Kong, it was pretty quick experience. I was here for like 48 hours. And as you said, I performed in front of all those people. It was like an estimated crowd of like 30,000. And I'd never performed the song live in my life before. So that was, in at the deep end. And I'd recorded it actually 6 years before the song. So after that first experience, which was incredibly surreal, it went to #1 the very night that I performed it as well. So, I mean, all these things happened that I just wasn't expecting at all. So it was hard to get my head around. And then it happened over the weekend in Hong Kong. And on the following Monday, I was back in the office in London. And I was a bit restless because, I spent so long trying to get a break. And then finally I got one in the most unlikely and unexpected, ways. But I was thinking, how do I keep the momentum going? What should I do next? And so ultimately I decided that I would come back to Hong Kong with literally just my suitcase and my dream, and I would try and get a record deal. And I gave myself a deadline of 3 months. So I gave up everything in the UK and I moved here. and just sort of hit the ground running. I was knocking on doors of different record labels locally. A lot of them, to begin with, it was a bit difficult. There was a bit, it was kind of some resistance because the song became, it was used in a protest, an anti-government protest. So they were a bit wary of kind of signing me because they didn't think it would be easy to promote me on TV and radio. Fortunately, there was one record label that was interested, and to cut a long story short, they signed me, and then I worked on an album with them, and they released it, and it did pretty well. So it's been a mad journey,
And from what I've read, and it's kind of built from there. That you've just continued to build from there. You've learned Chinese. You're releasing songs in Mandarin now, and that's amazing. And I heard an interview where you'd mentioned, this is the vehicle whereby my songs can be heard. So I learned this language because this is the vehicle that's enabling my songs to get heard. And I just think it's awesome, man. And congratulations on building your career out of such an unlikely opportunity, but born out of work you had done and put into the world and put yourself out there. And then having to contend with the fact that, do I really want to be out there in this way? After all, I have this condition, I have this thing that I'm not 100% with. So tell me now a bit about that. You mentioned it is a form of neuropathy. And I believe it affects the arms, legs, hands, and feet. Is that primarily the areas that it affects?
Yes, that's right. So it affects the peripheral nerves, which is the nerves outside the central nervous system, and it affects the arms, the hands, the lower legs and feet, and you get sort of progressive muscle wastage over time. But it's one of those things that, when I was younger, I had no idea that I had it. I mean, at times I just thought I was a bit clumsy. Yeah. And I was a gymnast. I used to compete as a gymnast, and the floor was my event. So I was doing all the backflips and the tumbles and the somersaults. Yeah. It's only when I got into my mid-20s that I started to notice. And a lady, I was working at a hospital, and a lady approached me, and she wondered what was wrong with my different walking gait, because you get, one of the first things that I got was kind of mild foot drop, where the kind of feet slap on the floor, and because the muscles were starting to waste away in the feet, basically. And so to compensate, I would lift up my knee and sort of place my foot down. Yeah, so you're just lifting up the knee higher when you walk, basically. And she noticed that, and she pointed out to me. I had no idea what she was going on about. That prompted me to go to see a doctor, and they did some tests, and then they referred me to a geneticist, and ultimately they came back with this diagnosis. It's, because it's progressive in nature, severity differs from individual to individual, really, and it can affect you at different times. And as I said, for me, it wasn't until my mid-20s. And it can plateau where you get kind of no development for a while, and then all of a sudden it might accelerate. Some people require a wheelchair in the later stages. Others don't. And for me, I just have it in my lower legs and my feet. It can also affect the hands. Generally, across the board, most people who have it have quite chronic fatigue because the muscles waste, they have to work harder. So, I think everybody who has it, because there's kind of different types of CMT as well, quite a few different strands. So,
How common is it?
Actually, it is the most common inherited neurological condition in the world. But despite that, I mean, not many people have heard of it, and it has got a very weird name.
Why is that, do you think? Because I hadn't, it was like, have I heard of this? Maybe, I don't know. You say it's the most common neurological condition. Why do you think people haven't heard of it?
Yeah, I think the name doesn't help, to be honest. Sure. It doesn't really catch, Charcot-Marie Tooth. And
you ever hear of von Willebrand disease?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's I don't know. It's strange because if I do tell people, often they say, "Is that something to do with your teeth?" That's why there needs to be more awareness. And I think, well, seriously, because awareness helps with ultimately getting funding to studies into treatment and everything.
Absolutely. Policy differences. There's real world outcomes to awareness. I totally agree.
Exactly. So that's why I'm kind of pushing ultimately to have more public awareness. And, with awareness comes more education and hopefully a bit more empathy as well, with these things. And because it's something people haven't heard of, when I tell them, it doesn't really help right now because they just look at me with a blank face. And as I said, assume it's got something to do with my teeth.
How are you doing right now? Is it interfering with your ability to perform or excel, or interfering with your life personally in any way? How are you today?
Yeah, well, pretty much like you said, for a long time, I never mentioned it. And I kind of took the approach sort of, if somebody doesn't ask me, I won't tell them about it. But if they did, I would speak about it. And there was that kind of fear as a performer that, sort of fear, anxiety about being found out, as you mentioned. And would it be kind of a distraction? Because I wanted people to focus on my music and not the way I was walking. So that was kind of the fear. But, I aside from a couple of incidences, I haven't had too much, people saying unkind things, or even noticing it. But I don't know, I just kind of deal with it on a day-to-day basis. And I do have to wear what they call an AFO, an ankle foot orthotic, which, it helps to correct the foot drop. Yeah, whereas before it was a bit more noticeable and I would get more stares out in public. And that was the hardest thing to deal with, I think. When they see somebody young, like me, and kind of walking a bit differently, I think people were just confused by it. It certainly helps to have the AFO, which it enables me to walk pretty much normally because it corrects the foot drop. And it's helped quite a bit, and it's because it used to stress me out a lot.
So I would encourage people to check out Kashy's website, and his name is spelled KASHYKEEGAN.com. There's links, of course, there to the YouTube channel with videos, opportunities to stream his music. And something else that you had said that resonated was focusing on songs of encouragement, and that there are a lot of songs on love and heartbreak, but the idea of songs of encouragement, and maybe kind of as a final thought for other people who have CMT, who might be inspired by your success and your openness as someone living with it in a very public way, in a public profession. What kind of encouragement might you give, or have you given, to younger people living with Charcot-Marie Tooth Disease?
Yeah, well, as you said, most of the songs that I've written are songs of encouragement. And that's always been my goal, really, for me, music has always been, I guess you could say, a form of therapy in a way. Like, I always wrote songs to try and uplift myself with the hope that if people got a chance to hear them, that it might help others too, who are facing similar challenges or whatever struggles or adversity in their life, to kind of help give them a bit of a boost. I mean, that's the way that I've always used music. And I think I kind of lean on that more than anything else. And it was certainly those type of songs that I was inspired by that made me want to, write my own songs and in my own small way, try and do for others what music has done for me. So, I mean, and I write these songs irrespective of what the kind of people are going through. I just hope it can, be of some encouragement in whatever way people want to use it,
So again, his website is KashyKeegan.com, KASHYKEEGAN. Kashy, you obviously have such a big story. We've skimmed the surface of it today, and thank you for doing so in the context of bringing a little more awareness to CMT. I hope we were able to introduce it to a few people who will just know a little more the next time they meet someone with it or hear about it. They'll know it doesn't have anything to do with your dental hygiene. So hopefully that's a success for us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
A pleasure. This month's interview guest is Dr. Kathy High, the co-founder, president, and head of research and development at Spark Therapeutics. To put it simply, Dr. High is on the cutting edge of gene therapy and hemophilia, and she's been working in it for decades. She was a longtime member of the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania and of the medical staff at the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, CHOP. She served a 5-year term on the FDA Advisory Committee on Cell Tissue and Gene Therapies and is a past president of the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy. She received a degree in chemistry from Harvard University, heard of it, an MD from the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, a business certification from the University of North Carolina Business School Management Institute for Hospital Administrators, and an MA from the University of Pennsylvania, in anticipation of launching the Science Fair, a 4-module interactive exhibit taking place Friday, October 4th from 11:30 to 6:30 inside the exhibition hall of NHF's Bleeding Disorders Conference. Dr. High joined me to talk for a few minutes about the people and events that first sparked her interest in science, how the twisting path of gene therapy grabbed a hold of her, and what helped her through the times she felt most discouraged and doubted her ability to keep going. I was kind of surprised that toward the end of the conversation, she opened up about something so personal. But it makes for a very interesting interview, I think. Dr. High is as relatable as she is brilliant, and I hope you enjoy getting to know her just a little bit. Here is my interview of Dr. Kathy High from Spark Therapeutics. I'm now joined for the episode 40 BloodStream Podcast interview with none other than Dr. Kathy High. Hi, Dr. High. How are you?
I'm great, Patrick.
Yeah, we're catching up here toward the end of August. Just as maybe a way of getting started, how has your summer been?
Well, honestly, it's been very busy, but I am looking forward to going on vacation next week.
Good. I'm sure it's well earned. Anywhere particularly of interest?
Well, what I'm really excited about is that we are going to take our relatively small sailboat across from Connecticut to Block Island.
Wow. I'm not really familiar with people who sail. That sounds like quite an adventure. Is this something you have done before, or is this a bucket list type item, or where is sailing come into play in your life?
Well, my husband is actually a fairly experienced sailor, and he's gone on longer voyages up and down the New England coastline.
Well, that's very exciting, and I'm glad that you have that ahead to look forward to. And while we don't share sailing as something in our life experience, we do have another connection outside of hemophilia that might surprise people, and that is in the world of entertainment. You care to share with people your connection to the world of entertainment?
Yes, my connection to the world of entertainment is that our middle child, a daughter, despite having 2 parents who are physicians, grew up to be an actor. And people may have seen her in movies like Spanglish, where she played the daughter of Téa Leoni and Adam Sandler, or on television programs like The Good Fight and The Good Wife. So The Good Fight is a spinoff of The Good Wife, where she plays a character named Marissa Gold.
Marissa Gold on The Good Fight.
Yes,
okay.
Marissa Gold, who was also Marissa Gold on The Good Wife.
Well, one of the segments on BloodStream here, one of the not-so-science related segments, which we are going to get to in just a bit, that is science, is my mother reviewing things that she's currently watching on television. So I'll have to give her a heads up that we have a reason that I need a review of The Good Fight. I had read that when you were 10 years old, a chemistry set from Santa introduced you to the joys of scientific experiment and studying. Do you remember the very first experiment that you conducted? And when did that initial interest start to bubble into something else?
Well, I have to admit that Santa had gotten a few prompts from me about what I might be interested in receiving. I had shown a fascination with a chemistry set that I saw in a store, but the one that Santa brought me was very special because it had a manual with over 100 experiments outlined, and you had everything you needed in the chemistry set to conduct all of these 100 experiments. And although I do not remember the first one in detail, what I do remember was that this chemistry set actually had a working Bunsen burner. No, actually, it must have been an alcohol flame burner because, of course, we didn't have a gas outlet in the house. So it must have been an alcohol flame burner. And I remember that my mother was my mother, who is the daughter of a chemist, was very concerned about my operating that in the house and was sure that I would end up burning down the house. But fortunately, I did not. It confirmed my interest in chemistry, and I ended up majoring in chemistry in college. So it was a good gift from Santa.
And were there any teachers along the way that had a particular influence on you or led you to start specifying that interest in science in a certain direction?
Well, that's an interesting question. I will say that when I was still in grade school, a person who had a big influence on me was my paternal grandmother, who had been a teacher, and she saw how much I liked math, and she still had friends who worked at the state textbook warehouse. And I can remember going with her to the state textbook warehouse and getting all the math workbooks that I could use, and whiling away many hours working through math workbooks. I think my father really hoped that I would pursue a career in aeronautical engineering, and I think you probably are too young to know, but in the 1960s, around the first landing of a man on the moon and so forth, there was great interest in aeronautical engineering, and I think he was really hoping that I would go in that direction, but I did not. So I haven't really named a science teacher. I've named my grandmother as an influence in mathematics. Mm-hmm. I have to say the teacher that I found most inspiring during my high school career was actually a history teacher. So,
and why was that?
To me, she was a person who really made history come alive. And she also challenged me to do a good deal of extra reading. She was a challenging teacher. She never let me slide by with something that was good enough.
And so when did hemophilia and bleeding disorders start to enter the picture?
Well, I was very fortunate to do medical school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And when I was in medical school, UNC Chapel Hill had, I think, the largest hemophilia treatment center on the East Coast. So while I was both a medical student and then an intern and a resident, I took care of many people who had bleeding disorders. And it was an endlessly interesting presentation and management situation. This was in the 1970s and before the AIDS era. So everything about it made sense. I think because of my background in chemistry, I was particularly attracted to the field of coagulation because people had worked out the coagulation cascade and had isolated some, but not all, of the molecules that were involved in coagulation. As a chemist, it was very interesting to me that your procoagulant and anticoagulant molecules are perfectly balanced to keep the blood fluid, and yet, at the smallest of triggers, when a blood vessel gets nicked, to immediately convert to a solid form, the fibrin clot. And I just found that extraordinarily interesting.
Would it be unusual for you at that point, with your background in chemistry, to come upon something such as the coagulation cascade, where there is such understanding and a degree of architecture around the whole, but still these gaps of knowledge about specific components of it.
You're exactly right. And so when I was going through my training in internal medicine, and I was trying to decide which subspecialty to do, struggling to find something that was really understood well enough at the molecular level for me to use my chemistry background. And I narrowed it down to endocrinology, hematology, or rheumatology. And I decided that I thought the hematology patients were the most interesting ones. I decided to subspecialize in hematology. And so for my hematology training, I went to a lab that was really focused on working on the gene for globin, so the gene that's defective in sickle cell disease. And so the reason that that was one of the first genes that was ever cloned is because the red blood cells, which of course are abundant in the bloodstream, are full of copies of the messenger RNA of the globin gene. So for that reason, hematologists were able to isolate messenger RNA of globin, and then synthesize the complementary DNA from that. Now, those were some of the first genes cloned, and the people who did that, of course, received the Nobel Prize. And so when I was trying to decide what to do, all of that work was just happening. And I thought, how interesting is that you actually have the gene for this now, and you can try to figure out how to fix it for sickle cell disease. And so I went to a lab for my hematology fellowship that specialized in the regulation of expression of the globin genes. But then while I was in the lab, and just as I was finishing up, the genes for factor 9 and then factor 8 were cloned. And so then I thought, wow, I'd really like to focus on, what are the mutations that cause hemophilia? Can they be fixed? And that kind of thing. So when I left that laboratory where I'd trained on globin genes, I set up my own laboratory, but it was focused on factor 9 and the genes that caused hemophilia, the gene defects that caused hemophilia B. And one of the first projects that I did actually was defining the defect in the naturally occurring dog model of hemophilia B. First, I isolated the normal canine factor 9 gene, and then we determined what the defect was in the hemophilia B dog colony. But my goal in isolating that normal canine factor 9 gene was to determine whether we could successfully do gene therapy in the hemophilia B dog model. So that was really how I got started on that path of investigation.
That's so interesting. And just to help listeners appreciate, gene therapy is something that is presented as new and novel, which of course it is in many ways. But just to help appreciate the amount of work that you have done in the world of gene therapy as it pertains to the factor 9 and eventually the factor 8 molecule, when did that start? How long has this been the focus of your work?
Well, I started the work to clone the dog factor 9 gene with the goal of using it in gene transfer in the 1980s. And then after about 10 years, we had clear proof of concept in the dog model. And we had great data using a particular type of vector, an AAV vector, introduced into the liver of dogs with hemophilia B. We could see long-term expression over more than a decade after we gave the vector to the dog liver. So beginning in the late 1990s, we started to do clinical trials of AAV factor 9 vectors in people with severe hemophilia B. And honestly, when we started the work, we thought that it would be very straightforward. Dogs, after all, this dog model weighs 20 kilograms. The average adult male is 70 kilograms, maybe a little more. Because we had been successful in a 20 kilogram dog, we thought, okay, well, this is not a very big jump then. And we thought, okay, well, we're almost there. But that, as you know, did not turn out to be the case.
Of course. And what I know there's so much that goes into this and our time is limited, but what were the major roadblocks initially? So at that phase, that wasn't the case because chiefly why?
Well, the first obstacle that we encountered was that we needed to make enough of the vector for an adult. And we had to make it to clinical standards, which are, of course, much higher than the standards for material that may go into a dog model. So we solved that problem by collaborating with a company that was interested in gene therapy. So they had put a lot of resources into manufacturing. And we thought, well, now that we've done that, that should really take care of most things. We discovered when we started the clinical trial something that all drug developers know well, which is that there's a reason that the regulatory agencies do not license products based on animal studies alone, that animal studies do not fully predict how things will behave in humans. The first problem that we encountered was that in contrast to what happened in hemophilic dogs, after we infused a vector into a person, we assessed all the body fluids of this first recipient afterwards to see was vector showing up in the various body fluids. And we expected it in the bloodstream, but what we did not expect is that we also found it in the semen. That was very concerning to the regulatory agencies, because if you take gene therapy, it's supposed to be just for you, not for any potential offspring. So we had to stop and develop an animal model and try to understand more about why we saw that in people when we had not seen it in hemophilic dogs. And so that took us about a year to work out, but we worked all that out and we got everything back on track again. And then as we did the dose escalation, what we found is that as we got to doses that were high enough to drive levels of expression that would really change the phenotype of the disease, we began to see immune responses to the vector. And so then we had to spend time working out exactly what that immune response was to and how we could manage it so that we could get long-lasting expression in humans in the same way that we had in other large animals.
And how long a process did it take to then overcome that challenge?
Well, we started the trial where we saw that problem in 2001, and we published a paper about it in 2006. The trial went on between 2001 and 2004. We published a paper about it in 2006, and we suggested that the way to manage that immune response would be to put the person on an immunomodulatory drug like prednisone if they got that response. The first person to try that was one of our friendly competitors who eventually became a collaborator. And they started a trial in 2010. And they wrote in the trial that if they saw anything like what we had seen, they would start the patient on prednisone, as we had suggested. And so the first several patients, they didn't see anything like that. But the fifth person that they enrolled, and interestingly, at the very same dose where we had seen this, at the very same vector dose where we had seen this before, they saw that immune response and they started prednisone, and it did rescue some of the expression. So actually they called us when that happened, and we studied the lymphocytes from the patient. So we ended up collaborating with them on the program.
There's so many questions connected to this, but I suppose that's why gene therapy is of such interest. I do want to specifically ask you about the founding of Spark. So maybe we should start to transition into that part of the conversation. So when did all of this work eventually give way to that part of your career?
Well, so I'll tell you, the company that we were working with in Northern California that was making our vector was profoundly affected by some events that occurred toward the end of the first decade of clinical gene therapy. That was that there were some high-profile adverse events in gene therapy trials, not related to anything that we were doing or that company was doing.
Okay.
These high-profile adverse events had, I would say, a mushrooming effect, a cascading effect that began to affect everything that was going on in gene therapy. And for people outside the field, there became more and more a sense that gene therapy was not ready for prime time, that there were still many things that needed to be worked out, and perhaps they shouldn't be doing clinical trials yet. And anyway, the consequence of all of that was that most of the gene therapy companies that formed in the 1990s ended up folding because they really could not get support from investors anymore. And so most of the work went back into the academic medical centers, and it was funded by organizations like the NIH as research projects. We were very fortunate that a number of the people that we had worked with in that gene therapy company in Northern California agreed to come to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to help us continue the work. And we were also fortunate, the CEO of Children's Hospital believed enough in gene therapy to let us set up vector production, clinical grade vector production, so that we could keep doing clinical trials in the hospital. And all of that happened in about 2004.
Okay.
He did stipulate as a condition for us to continue to do this work that he wanted us to work on diseases other than just hemophilia. He wanted us to work on other diseases that affected the pediatric population because it was a children's hospital. I had a colleague at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Jean Bennett, who had been working on a gene therapy approach for a rare form of congenital blindness. I went over and asked her if she would work with us to mount a trial at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia on this rare form of blindness, and she said yes. And so we began working on that. And that work went ahead pretty well. And by 2012, we were ready to begin a phase 3 clinical trial, which is, as you know, the last step before something gets approved. So when we began the phase 3 trial, that same CEO of the hospital called me in and asked what I intended to do if the phase 3 trial was successful, since this is a hospital and we don't commercialize products. We began to think about what other options there might be. And to make a long story short, we considered a number of options, including partnering with biotech companies or pharmaceutical companies. One of the options we considered was spinning out a company from the work that we were doing at Children's Hospital. And this company would be exclusively devoted to gene therapy for inherited diseases. And in the end, after looking at many options and considering things carefully over a period of more than a year, we decided that the best way to protect the work going forward was to set up a company that would be exclusively devoted to gene therapy. And that's how we formed Spark Therapeutics in March of 2013.
That makes very good sense. That's interesting to hear the story laid out that way. I do want to respect your time. Do you have a hard out, or do you have another couple of minutes?
I have another couple of minutes.
So, Dr. High, obviously what has connected you and I and brought us to this podcast interview is the science fair that Believe and Spark have been working on together now for about a year, and will be premiering at the BDC in Anaheim in October. I'm curious to know, what is Spark's position when it comes to patient and family education, and what aspect of the science fair are you personally most excited by?
First of all, I think that all people, any kind of medical problem or condition, it's to their advantage to know as much as they possibly can about their condition. At a certain level, they know their disease far better than any healthcare provider ever will. So I think that patient education and patient advocacy are extremely important. Secondly, I will say that along the path of developing gene therapy, there were many times when I got very, very discouraged. Honestly, at times felt like I wasn't sure I could keep going. Patient support and patient goodwill and patient insights and patient prayers helped me more than you might ever guess. So I believe very strongly patient interest and advocacy are really important for improving treatments for disease. Now, what am I specifically excited about the science fair? Well, I think there are a lot of things to be excited about the science fair, but I think that you can't start too early building budding scientists and physicians. And so I'm excited that this is going to help interest young people who may have hemophilia, people who may have a family member with hemophilia, that this is going to help them understand more about blood disorders, and hopefully maybe some of them will eventually become hematologists. But I believe very strongly that, the more people understand about how their bodies work and how blood coagulation works, the better.
Completely agreed. And that's why our goal, and it was at the top of all of our documents as we worked, was to help patients and families understand more of the science behind hemophilia and bleeding disorders, as well as more of the science behind the treatments that are currently available and in development, so they're empowered to ask better questions related to their options. That's it. It's giving people more tools to ultimately empower their own agency. So we're completely aligned, which is probably why this was made for a fantastic partnership, and people can take a look at some of the preliminary designs and drawings of what will be a 3,400 square foot exhibit inside the exhibition hall. So if you go to the exhibition hall on Friday of the BDC between 11:30 and 6:30, the science fair will be that 3,400 square foot raucous party that's taking place. And we highly encourage everybody who's attending BDC to come. There's never been anything quite like the science fair. So do come take a look at it. And see if it's worth all the hype. Challenge me. See if I'm overhyping it. You can go to thesciencefair.org now, and you can also learn more about Spark Therapeutics by visiting their site, which is SparkTX, TED, X for X-ray, sparktx.com, to learn more about Dr. High's company and their work. I really enjoyed this conversation. I could speak to you at length, so maybe sometime down the road we can catch up again, perhaps at a particularly interesting turning point for the science fair or Spark or you. But anytime you'd like to, please just feel free to prompt me. I'd love to talk with you more anytime, Dr. High.
Okay, great, Patrick. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
Take care, and I will see you soon.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Okay, and joining me now, as she does every month, to give us her latest recommendations for what to stream online, is my mother, Sue Lynch, who's going to be joining us in just a moment. I have to first mention just one last time, of course, that the BloodStream Podcast is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Find out about their support of the bleeding disorders community at bleedingdisorders.com. Mama Sue, how are you?
I am doing well. How are you this afternoon?
Should we tell people how I tried to take your job away from you?
Yes, you did, because you misplaced my TV control. So I said to you right away, well, I can't do it anymore if I can't watch Netflix and Amazon. And fortunately, your mother-in-law found it for me.
We have, I don't know that I've ever searched so far and wide in so small an area for a pretty obvious object with no success. And then there was right there all along, hiding in the couch, right in plain sight. Well, I'm glad that we found it so that you could get on your job, because it's an important job that you have. So we've got 3, as always, to recommend. The very first, Shark Water Extinction. Well, that's a compelling title. What is Shark Water Extinction about?
Well, Shark Water Extinction, it's on Amazon. It was made this year, or I should say it was put out this year. I don't know exactly when it was made. And it's about the decreasing population of the sharks worldwide. And coincidentally, I don't know if I told you, my brother Billy, as you know, he lives in China. A few months ago, before I even knew about this documentary, he told me that it's horrible that what the Chinese do is they fish for sharks, they cut off the fins and throw the shark back in the water because they eat shark fin soup. And it's a delicacy. And then I stumbled across this documentary, and apparently people are all worldwide are illegally fishing for sharks, even when they don't throw it back in. With any kind of hunting, even land animals, as you know, there's hunting seasons and there's limits. So people that eat shark steak, it's not that you can't eat shark, but these illegal fishermen, they meet a few miles out of the countries where there's really no law. You send all these sharks mostly to Asia. It's big in Costa Rica, in the Bahamas, and believe it or not, in Los Angeles. And
which was surprising to hear.
It is, and this fellow that made the documentary, his name is Rob Stewart. He's a native Los Angeles person. And what they do is they put what they call these drift nets, like giant fishing nets, a few miles out that are like a mile long, and that they catch all kinds of things in the night. This documentarian went out in his boat at night to catch them, and they were shooting him with guns, real bullets.
I remember you mentioning that to me when you were telling me about this. Do you know that he died while he was filming for this?
I did know that. Yes, it was quite a surprise at the end. He used some new equipment to go down underneath at the end of the documentary, and it failed him, and he died of hypoxia, sadly.
So they show it in the film? It's included in the film?
Yes, it is included, yeah. They show him even talking about the new equipment and getting into the new equipment, and then they tell you, in words that the fellow died. But his documentary made the laws much stricter in Los Angeles, and I don't know what the punishment is, but if you get caught doing that, before that it was kind of murky, the laws. So he did make a change, and he made some very good points in the documentary. He said, like, if someone shoots an elephant, the world goes crazy. And elephants kill 200 people every year. Sharks kill 5 people a year worldwide. I found that to be a very low number, but that's what he said.
That is a very low number, but yeah, we'll just give it to him.
And, when I forgot when I watched this, did I watch it on Amazon or Netflix? And I went to Amazon and I typed in, shark, and like 20 horrible movies came up about sharks with their mouth. And he said the media has a lot to do with why people don't care about the sharks. Apparently, like in the last 30 years, the shark population worldwide is down over 90%. They're on the verge of becoming endangered. And they're the number one predator in the sea. 30 years ago, they were plentiful worldwide, and now they're not. And it's all with this illegal fishing. So, and there's a lot more in this. I don't want to tell too many things about it in case anyone wants to watch it, but it's very informative and disturbing. And
from Rotten Tomatoes gave it a critical review of 100% based on 28 reviews. So yeah, it sounds as though it's pretty widely accepted as a great film. It's just quickly, you were saying about the sharks and media. You've said this to me, to be mindful of what you're consuming, mindful of what I'm listening to and watching, because we get affected by the things that we take in. And I think sometimes, I'm guilty of when I hear someone say like, oh, that's the way people think because of the media. Sometimes I'm like, all right, enough with this already. You have to take agency over what you think in life. But it's true. The more we expose ourselves to the same thing it's going to affect the way we think and see things. So if we only ever see sharks and images of sharks, and it's like pit bulls too, right? We've talked about this. Certain dogs, if you only ever see them depicted a certain way, you develop an association with it that's, not necessarily in line with the truth.
Well, this documentary shows this man like swimming right among them, and they don't bother him at all. They're not really interested in hurting any human being. I don't know what the 5 that they kill a year, I don't know what the situation is. Is it surfers that startle them? I'm not sure about that. They're not vicious at all, and they should not be turning extinct. And it was quite a shock when I heard the poor man had to die at the end, but he did make a real change in law and bringing about, the knowledge to people that we have to be careful.
Just an extraordinary legacy to leave behind, given what he was passionate about. So from the sea to land, let's go to the coffee bean world. What else are you watching?
Well, I stumbled upon one in Amazon also called Starbucks Unfiltered. I forget what year it was made, in the last couple of years, I think. And of course, we all know Starbucks. It's so popular. It's the number one coffee shop in the world. But I didn't realize it's been around since early 70s, 1970s. I was surprised at that. And it started in the state of Washington as a little neighborhood coffee shop. And now, of course, it's a new Starbucks opens every 15 hours somewhere in the world.
And like, for how long is that sustainable? That's a lot of Starbuckses.
I was shocked. Oh, there's 350,000 in 75 countries.
350,000.
They don't advertise. And when I heard that, I was like, it's the truth. I never saw an advertisement. Their advertisement is that mermaid on the cup watching someone walk down the street with it. Isn't that amazing?
I mean, it's smart. It's clever. I'm sure at critical stages of their growth, their intelligence about marketing served them very well. We see them now and they're, rolling in money, right? Or whatever, but I'm sure there were stages that was really important.
They're a multi-billion-dollar company. And they brought in a businessman, a fellow named Schultz, in the 80s, and that's what made it explode and leave Washington State and go everywhere. And they were even saying in Manhattan, 300 of them in Manhattan. But because
sometimes it feels like on one block.
Yes, they said that sometimes you can have one on either end of the block, and they're all doing good business. And of course, they're expensive, Starbucks. But the rationale by this fellow Schultz was if you appeal to the upper class and the wealthy, the rest will follow. And I guess that's true, because not just wealthy people drink Starbucks, right?
That's true. I guess that did work. Is he still running for president, that guy?
I don't even know if he's still there. I don't remember. They said, how they give college scholarships. Very few employees have ever complained publicly, blah, blah, blah. They introduced, the couches, and it's funny they were interviewing the British man that's in charge of the English company, the Great Britain company, and you know how they ask for your name when you go to Starbucks, and he said, we Brits, we don't really want to talk to anybody and give our name. We just want a cup of coffee. He said we find it hard to have it like that, But
I agree with them on that. You came around on them a little bit once they started lightening up some of their roasts.
Oh, yes. But you know what they pointed out? They also wanted to get the non-coffee drinkers. So they now have a lot of sweet non-coffee drinks that not only are expensive, but have the equivalent of 25 teaspoons of sugar in them.
They're joining the milkshake business. They have they've got some lovely milkshakes at Starbucks. Was there anything about it that was particularly, changed the way you think about the company? Was there anything that really stood out to you in particular?
I'm trying to think. I'm not really. I'm not, I was never really a fan of Starbucks because I'm more of a Dunkin' Donuts coffee person. I mean, I've probably had Starbucks 10 times in my life. I'm not a Starbucks person myself.
I didn't realize it was that low. That's very low.
Yeah, if I have a choice, I would go somewhere else because I don't want to spend $7 for a cup of coffee.
Well, I'm impressed, but I'm impressed that you still wanted to watch a documentary about them, even if they're not necessarily one of your preferred places. That says a lot about your enjoyment of documentaries.
Fair play to them. They're a good company. They use ethically sourced beans, blah blah blah, and they're successful and good for them. But it's not my kind of coffee. I prefer Dunkin' Donuts or deli coffee, if not home coffee.
All right, well, fair enough. I guess we're not going to be getting Starbucks as a sponsor on the podcast anytime soon. And finally, lastly, what else are you watching these days?
Well, I watched a really good documentary on Netflix. It's called Diagnosis. It's new. I believe it's from this year, and apparently it was made by the New York Times. There's a Dr. Lisa Sanders that has a column every week in the magazine section of the New York Times, and they put out diseases that she's come across in her practice and then asks for the public's opinion and what do you think could be this and, diseases that stump the doctors. So now this Dr. Lisa Sanders made this 7-part documentary series about people that she's come across that, have diagnoses that they cannot have traditional medicine help them. And it's really very, very good because I don't know what part of the social media these are being put on. Is it Facebook? I don't know. But people from all over the world respond, including medical doctors and medical people that have the disease or similar diseases. And it's quite successful in helping these people.
Well, it's one of the great things about media online, digital media and social media. There's plenty of problems. One of the upsides is that it does enable people with particularly rare conditions and diseases to find each other when they would not otherwise have a shot. And if you can create something like this show that starts to gain traction, then that starts getting shared and more people come out of the woodwork. So it's neat to see that in action.
I tell you, I was sorry to see it end. I mean, it really made you feel good watching it. I mean, not everybody was cured, but everybody got support, met new people from all around the world. Some people did get cured and get diagnosed with very rare, unusual conditions. A doctor in Italy was looking at this diagnosis website and was able to help a young girl with severe muscle pain. She flew to Italy and they found out her problem. And there's a young girl with a seizure disorder. There was a child that goes limp hundreds of times a day, blah, blah, blah. Someone with nonstop fainting spells. And it was really, really good. I would really recommend it. It's a feel-good show, actually.
So we got shark water extinction if you want to get depressed about the reality of sharks right now. And then if you want to wonder about coffee and the ingenuity of the next president of the United States, Howard Schultz, you can watch Starbucks Unfiltered. Good luck to you, Howard. And if you want to feel, it sounds like mostly good, about people with rare medical conditions, you can watch Diagnosis on Netflix. Those are 3 good, very different options. I have to also ask you, just before we go, Mom, I'm aware, I just literally, as I was hitting the button to start here, I was recognizing, today is September 11th, which is obviously, a day of importance nationally in general. But for those of us who are in New York, just had its own, I guess, unique place in our history. What do you look back on when you think of September 11th? What stands out to you about that day or the event or that time period? What do you generally think about first?
Oh, my God. I remember it very much. I was with my mom and bringing her home here to be with the dogs while I slept because I was working at the time at night, and we heard it in the car, and we came home and we were just glued to the TV, and it was just terribly sad. And actually today at work, the TV had on, everybody getting up and saying the names. And I see these young adults, 18, 20 years old, and they were babies when their parents died from that terror. So it's just a sad thing. I mean, I know it's important to commemorate it, and I believe when you are personally affected, you want to commemorate it. You don't want people to forget that your loved one died. But I find it very sad every September 11th when it's on television all over the place. But like I personally wasn't affected, so maybe I would feel differently. But I find it extremely sad.
I remember that as a day where, because I was 15, and we didn't, at school, they my school chose not to put on the television, so they asked people whose parents worked in the building or around the World Trade Center to congregate in the library, and then they just kind of had us go back to school, which is not what most schools did, I have found out in retrospect, but that was our experience. And this is pre-smartphones and, the internet in the world in your pocket. So it wasn't until I walked in the front door and you and Gran were sitting on the couch watching the TV, and you were just like, can you believe it? And up until that point, like, I knew it was real because we were talking, they told us, they announced it at school. But as a kid, I came home and I looked to you and to Gran, I looked to my parents for, what does this mean? And can you believe it? And I realized, they don't know what this means. Like, no one knows what this means. This is when people talk about John Lennon's assassination or Martin Luther King Jr. or just these moments where it's a real before and after. And if you're a kid, the way that influences the way you look at the world. I was 15, I wasn't 7, but it was just an interesting moment of, wow, none of us know what this means.
Yeah, life changed after that.
It did. It really did.
Now you go everywhere, and there's signs everywhere in the city, especially. Look and listen. Tell someone if you see an abandoned bag. Blah 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 blah. That those signs were never around before. And actually, the month before that, I don't know if you realize we had gone to Alaska.
Oh yeah, it's funny. I separate those two. Talk about before and after. I don't think of those two things as happening within a couple months of themselves.
Well, the reason I remember it so well is because when we were stopping at the different ports, we just went off the boat and we went to the, bringing bags in of things we bought. And there was no checking on you. There was no x-ray machines. And so I'm sure, I haven't been on this cruise since then, but I'm sure the security is much different than it was the month before 9/11.
I'm always curious, too, when traveling, sometimes you can kind of tell that there's heightened security at an airport, and my brain will run through, is today a holiday? Is it a weekend? Is it a big travel day? And then if it's like a random Tuesday, I'm wondering, what news do they have that I don't have? So anyway, not to end us on a real kind of note, but I couldn't help but recognize what the day was. So thanks for sharing that, Mom. And as always, thanks for taking the time to walk through some fun stuff to watch online. Appreciate hearing from you.
All right, you're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mom. It's now time for the BloodStream Podcast, episode 40, Parting Shots. One last little bit to leave the audience with, bleeding disorders related or otherwise, before we say so long, farewell, and we'll see you after NHF. Natalie, would you like me to go first this week or month? I know you want me to, right? We just talked about this 5 seconds ago.
Yeah.
All right.
I do.
So I have a parting shot. My parting shot for the month of September is, we mentioned the number of things that Believe Limited will be doing at the BDC in a few weeks. You can look at the website, believeltd.com/BDC 2019 if you want to take a look at those programs. I'm also, as an individual, going to be participating in a mental health panel that's taking place Friday between 2:45 and 5 o'clock as part of the adult men's track. I'm very thankful to NHF for putting this kind of a panel together. I think it's going to be quite an interesting couple of hours of conversation about the role that hemophilia, or I guess the way hemophilia and mental health, mental illness, and unwellness can interact with each other. So I'm expecting it to be valuable and vulnerable and emotional and a lot of things. And I wanted to make mention that it's happening, that I'm honored and a little scared to be participating in it, and that any adult male who is attending NHF's Bleeding Disorders Conference is welcome to attend it Friday, 2:45 to 5 o'clock. Check the program agenda for more information about the men's mental health panel at BDC. And Natalie, what is your parting shot for September?
My September parting shot is, well, September's my favorite month.
Why?
Because, well, for a couple of reasons, but
it's your birthday month.
It is my birthday month. That's the main reason.
Oh, come on.
No, but also I was a dorky kid who loved to go back to school so much. I would get so excited getting the perfect outfit ready. I also loved school supplies. Like, that's literally what I miss most about being like a kid, is shopping, like getting the school supplies
new
list.
JanSport backpack.
I mean, I didn't get the cool stuff. Like, my mom got me the real basic stuff.
Like what?
Like, you know, people would get like cool folders with like pictures on it, and I just had like the paper ones that were like red, blue, yellow.
Right.
But just like everything was so crisp.
Yes.
And like the crayons weren't screwed up yet.
Yep.
Anyways, this has nothing to do with my parting shot.
Oh.
I'm just saying that I love September. And if you love September, and if you love me, and if you love this podcast, my birthday is September 29th. And I am a new board member to Save One Life. And it would mean a lot to me if anyone listening could go on to the Save One Life website and sponsor a kid. That is it's a big financial commitment. So if that's not in
$35 a month,
the cards for you, just any donation to Save One Life in the month of September in honor of my birthday would make me delighted.
She's saying that with a big smile.
Yeah. So, So Save One Life. It's pretty easy to donate on the website. So,
well, I also will take this opportunity to say that as the husband of this board member, it was an honor to attend the Red Tie Soiree where NHF honored Save One Life with the Global Impact Award
as my +1.
As your +1, it was a genuine honor to be there in that capacity, and that was a first. And maybe it seems a little silly, but it meant a lot for me to be in that particular capacity for that event. So I support you, and I think that's great. People can go to saveonelife.net to learn more. And that is all for this episode. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, Entertainment to Affect Change, the Hemophilia Alliance, our presenting sponsor, Takeda, as well as our Like segment sponsor, Genentech, and our Share segment sponsor, Sanofi Genzyme. Thanks as well to segment contributors, Debbie De La Riva, Amy Board, Rick Starks, Dr. Kathy High, Delisa O'Brien, Kashy Keegan, and Mama Sue Lynch. Subscribe to the BloodStream Podcast and the Ask the Expert Podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, share our shows, and help spread the word. You can email us, mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find us on facebook.com/bloodstreammedia and at bloodstreaminfo on Instagram and Twitter. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on bloodstreampod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynn.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.